Well, good morning. It's good to see all of you today. If you're a guest with us today, we're so glad that you're here. Be sure to stop by our shelves over here in this middle room and grab yourself a t-shirt as a gift, just to say thank you for being here. Make sure you grab that before you head out. Well, I'm so glad to be here with you guys today. For those of you who might not know who I am, usually I'm out in the back with the kids. My name is Alyssa Gillespie, and I'm the children's director here. And so I'm excited to get to be in here with you guys today and talk to some adults. That's cool. But I'm thrilled to be here as we wrap up our Best Life series. And over the past few weeks, we've been looking at what does it mean? What does it look like to live our best life ever? And we've been focusing on this verse, these words of Jesus that says, "I've come that they may have life and have it to the full." So this isn't really, it's not something that we're just making up. It's not something that we just came up with on our own. This is what Jesus wanted for us. This was part of Jesus' purpose for coming to earth. It was part of Jesus' purpose for dying on the cross, is that so that we could live our best life ever, to live a full life, to live a good life. Some translations even say to live an abundant life. And so we've been talking about this the past few weeks, and last week, or the first week, Suzanne talked about how it all kind of starts with acknowledging and recognizing that we are loved, that God loves us and cares about us no matter what. And the challenge is that sometimes we don't believe that and that we don't trust that, but once we accept that and start to embrace that love and really lean into that love and believe that we are loved, it can change everything for us. And then last week, Michael talked about how once we've accepted that, once we're living in that love, it starts to kind of transform us and it starts to move in us in a different way. And we start to look at our lives and we see how our way of thinking and our lives kind of differ from what Jesus desires for us, what Jesus calls us to do. And so in that sense, we have to start dying to some stuff. If we want to live our best life ever, we have to get rid of some of what we think so that we can grow closer and deeper with Christ. And so as we've been walking through this from love to learning how to die to ourselves, now we kind of get to the point where we ask the question, well, what do we do? How do we really live out this best life ever? And so as I was thinking about this and preparing for speaking to you guys today, I started to wonder, if I look at the lives of the people around me, or even if I look at my own life, what are the things, like what kind of life do I give off to people? What does it look like that I'm actually living? Do we really live our best lives ever? And as I was thinking about this, I asked my husband, Kyle, I said, if you were going to tell me how you think that the people that you know and the people that you work with and the people that you interact with, what does it seem like they live their lives for? What would you say? And he said something that I think is so true for so many of us. And he said, I think that a lot of people just live just to get by. In some sense, we're just living to survive. We say, how many times do we get caught saying something like, well, if I can just get to this point, then I'll be okay. Or then I can do that. Or then if I can just get through the holiday season, if I can just get to this deadline, if I can just get through today, then maybe I'll really be able to live my life. But the sad thing about that is that if we continue in that cycle of just trying to get by and just trying to move on to the next thing, we get to the end of our lives and we think, what did I do? Who did I impact? What kind of difference did I make? Did I really live, or did I just get by? Did I just survive? And I think that kind of leads us to a place of feeling pretty empty. I know that in my own life, I have days where I get to the end of the day and I think, what did I do? Like, what difference did I make today? What impact did I? Did I touch somebody's life? Did I even speak to God today? Did I even think about God today? And it gives me a feeling that isn't very good. You just don't feel good and you just feel empty. And I think that's a problem that we see in our world today. There's so much sadness, there's so much loneliness, there's so much disconnect, and we just feel so empty because we just try to get by and we don't really live anything out, because we're so busy trying to meet these standards or find the next thing. And I think a lot of times when we look at how we live our lives, we're just living for ourselves. We can be very selfish people. I don't think any of us could say that we're not. We want to do what's best for us. We want to do what we want to do. We want what we like. It's all about us. It's us. And we think about us, and we don't even stop to consider sometimes that we live in a world and a community where we interact with people all the time. All the people that we come in contact with a day, and do we even stop to think about them, to consider what they're going through, to consider what they need, to consider what they want? And so sometimes we just live our lives pretty selfishly, and we get caught in this desire to want more. I want more of stuff. And I don't think that this is the type of life that Jesus had in mind for us. I don't think that this is the best life that Jesus wanted for us. And when we're stuck in that cycle of wanting more, it turns into things of like, we just want more wealth. We want to have more stuff. I want more money. And so we make all of our decisions and we do everything based off, how can I get more of that? And so we work really hard at our jobs and we spend long hours and we forget about our families and we don't have time for them, and we're just focusing on, how can I get that? Because if I just get that, then life will be good. Or maybe some of us just really want power. We really want that control in our lives. And how can I get more control? How can I really be in power in my job or in my family or wherever I go? How can I get more of that? And some of us, we're living for a better status. I want to be the most successful. I want to be the best at this. I want to do this. I want to have a good title. I want to be someone who's known for something. I want to be the one that people turn to. I want to be known. And we just get so caught up in that. And are we living? Are we living our best life, or are we just living to get more of something? And then finally, some of us, we just live to get that approval. And if I was going to put myself in one of these categories, I'm the person who's living for more approval more than anything else. I probably don't live my best life most of the time because I'm too busy worrying about, do you like me? Am I doing the right thing? My bosses are laughing. That's not a good sign, right? Am I doing the right thing? Am I meeting your standards? Am I doing what I need to be doing? And I can get so caught up and so wrapped up in that I'm not thinking anything about what Jesus thinks about me. And so we get so caught up in wanting more of this stuff. We just want more and more for us to make us feel good. And Jesus says that, he came to give us an abundant life. But I don't think that this is the abundant life. This is just a life of abundance. It's just a life filled with stuff. What can I get? What can I do? And that's not how we're meant to live. We're not meant to pursue those things. We're not meant to make those our focus. But Jesus says that he came to give us something bigger, to give us something better, to give us a life that's full of things like grace and forgiveness and peace, those moments of peace and encouragement to help us get through our days, to get through our lives, and love. God came to give us a life that's filled with love, an overwhelming amount of love, and ultimately so that we can have freedom, that we can live to our truest and freest selves. And that is an abundant life. It's not just a life filled with more. That is an abundant life. And you look at that list, and I don't know about you, but it's a little overwhelming to me because, first off, I don't stop and think about it enough. But God has given us so much. God has given us all these times and these moments where he's breaking through to us, trying to tell us how much we're loved, how important we are, and this great life that he has in store for us. If I look at this list of things, I can think of moments in my lives where I've experienced that grace, and I've experienced that moment of forgiveness and the relief that brings, and I know what it's like to live a free life, even if I don't do it all the time, and that's what it's all about. That's what I want my life to be about. That's what I want to live out in my life. And so what do we do with that? What do we do with this great gift that we've been given? All of these good things that God desires for us and has in store for us. And I think that there's lots of people in the Bible who have asked these same questions. This sounds great, but what do I do about it? How do I live this out? How do I make this happen? And in his letter to the Galatians, Paul writes, and I think he's writing to a church who's probably trying to figure it out too. What do we do? What are our next steps? How do we make this happen? How do we make this real? And he says some things that I think are so important and so needed for us to hear as we think about how we live this life. He says, the first thing he says, it's absolutely clear that God has called you to a free life. There's no question about this. There's no doubt that you are called to live a good and free life. And if you don't know that today, if you don't feel that in your heart, please know that God thinks you are good and that you are called to this free life. It is not limited to a certain group of people. It is for each and every one of us. It's absolutely clear. But then he goes on to say, just make sure that you don't use this freedom as an excuse to do whatever you want to do and destroy your freedom. And I think that's kind of where our humanity comes in, and that's a little bit about what Mike was talking about, how we have to die to things. You know, we get in the way a lot of the times. If we just stood back and let God do God's thing, we would be great. But we have to make sure that we don't just use what we've been given, this grace that we've been given, this freedom that we've been given, and just do whatever we want and forget what God wants and forget what it really means to live God's way. Because then we're not living our best lives, and we're taking away that freedom and that gift that God has given us. And then he says this. He says, rather, use your freedom to serve one another in love, because that's how freedom grows. And I think that's so important, because here's the thing. Living our best life ever and living that life out isn't really about us at all. It's about others. It's about the people that we encounter. It's about the people that we meet. There was a study recently by the Harvard Adult Development team, and they've been studying these men, over 700 men, for the past 75 years. And they started when they were teenagers, and they had all these ambitions of things that they wanted to do and what they thought was going to make their life good. They wanted to be rich. They wanted to be famous. These are things that we understand. They wanted to be, in control of things. And so they followed them, and they would interview them and go to their houses and observe them. And year after year for the past 75 years, it's one of the longest studies that anyone's ever done. And as far as I'm aware, they're still moving on, and now they're watching their children. But the thing that they found in this study, the biggest thing that stood out to them is that at the end of their lives, the things that mattered the most to these men, the things that determined how happy and how healthy they were, was whether or not they had good relationships, of whether or not they were in connection with other people. And I think Jesus would agree with that. I think Jesus would be all over that and be like, you know what, that's exactly right. I want you to be with one another. I want you to work together. I want you to build one another up. And so if we want to live our best life ever, then we have to be willing to figure out how we can help others live their best life ever. That's actually going to be one of your next steps is how can I help someone else live their best life ever? And so that's something to think about as we go through it. But here at Heritage, we have a little phrase that we like to use, and you'll see it on the walls, and you'll see it in the announcements and all those things, and it's this phrase, pass it on. Because that's what we're here to do. This church, it's not here for me. And this church isn't here for Suzanne and Michael. And this church isn't here for you. It's for all the people who don't know yet. It's for people that we have no clue who they are yet. It's for all the people who are searching and wondering and trying to figure out, is there a better way? Is there a better life? And so it's our job to take these good things that we've been given, to take this good life that God has given to us and pass it on to somebody else. And so what does that look like? How do we pass on? What do we pass on? And I think there's a lot of things, and these are just a few. You can pass on your story. How often do we sit down and talk with one another about our struggles or the good things in our lives or the things that we're going through? Do we really open up to one another and really have relationships with one another? Because sharing your story is just a gateway to something bigger and deeper for somebody. You can pass on your abundance. So maybe you have a lot to give. Maybe you have a lot of money. Maybe you have an excess of money, and you can pass a little bit of that on to make a difference for somebody else. Maybe you have a lot of stuff, and someone really needs something that you have, and maybe you pass that on. Even these material things of abundance that we have, we can pass those on and make a difference and give someone a little bit of hope to help them keep moving forward in their life. You can pass on your witness. I said story earlier, but I think witness is even a little bit deeper than that. How often and how frequently do we actually talk about what Christ has done in our lives? Do we share that with one another? Do we know those things? Does someone that you work with know about how God has changed your life? Do they know why you're trying to live your best life? Do they know what makes that important? Sometimes we need to share our witness. Sometimes it's just simply words of encouragement. We know that the world and people are struggling and that things are crazy right now, and sometimes people just need to know that someone's there to lift them up. Your gifts and your talents, you all have things that you're good at and you're great at and that you thrive in and that you're passionate about. And if you're not using those, then you need to find a place to plug in, a place to use those gifts, to use what God has given you, that God has blessed you with, to help make a difference in the lives of someone else. Whether that's here in this church or outside these walls, it doesn't matter, but use those gifts and talents that you've been given to help make a difference. You can pass on your time. We like to say that we're so busy, and I'll say that myself. I'm too busy to do that. I don't have enough time, but how much time do I spend watching Netflix or sitting in front of the computer? We have the time. We can carve out even just an hour of our week or even just an hour of our month to plug in and go live out our lives in community. Go show others what it's about. Go help somebody. Go guide somebody. Give your time. Pass on your time. You can use your voice. You can pass on your voice. There's plenty of people in our world today who are going through some pretty hard stuff. There's people who are facing injustice, and do we speak up for them? Do we help them make their voice heard? We can pass on our voice to help bring those situations to justice and to bring those people a little bit more humanity and life. And sometimes we just need to pass on our presence. We need to put down all the distractions, and we just need to be with one another and say that we're here and we're willing to listen or do nothing at all, but you're important to me, and so here I am. There's so much that we can pass on, and there's so many things that I probably didn't even list that you thought, oh, I could pass that on. I have that. I can do that. I can make a difference for someone in that way. Because here's the thing, I know I wouldn't be here if someone hadn't passed some of those things on to me. If someone hadn't passed on an invitation to church when I was a child, or if the youth and children's leaders of my church hadn't spent week after week with me, teaching me and growing with me and helping me to learn about this life. I wouldn't be here if people hadn't given me encouragement when I didn't believe in myself. I wouldn't be here if someone hadn't extended prayer and grace to me when I was feeling at my weakest and lowest. It makes a difference. And chances are most of us, and probably all of us, wouldn't be here today if someone hadn't passed some of that on to us. So we have to be willing to pass it on. We started this series with the words of Jesus, and I think it's only appropriate that we close with the words of Jesus too. In Luke, he says this. He says, from everyone who has been given much, much will be required. We've been given a lot. It says that God came to bring us that full life, that abundant life. Well, that word abundant means that there's an excess, that there's an overflow, that there's more than enough for us. And so we have to take that, what we've been given, and give it to others. To take from the overflow of what we know about God, of the grace that we've experienced, of the love that we've experienced, and help others find that, help others experience that. It's not just something that we should do, it's our responsibility. Jesus says we're required. So when we know that we're loved and we embrace that love, then more is required of us. And when we start to grow in our faith and we start to die to other things, then more is required of us. And when we really embrace our best life and that abundant life that God has given us, more is going to be required of us. God didn't call his disciples and then send them to go be by themselves. He said, go out, make more disciples. And so we have to ask ourselves how we're going to respond to what God has given us. How are we going to live out this best life ever?